Hello and welcome to today's HR Lunchtime Debate, looking at skills-based transformation. I'm Jo Gallitcher, editor of HR Magazine, and I'll be leading today's discussion. Focusing on skills as a strategic advantage is not a new trend for UK businesses, but thanks to the rapid evolution of HR tech, it's becoming a lot more commonplace. For years, jobs have been the dominating structure in how we talk about work, but organisations wanting to focus on agility, growth and innovation are moving to a whole new operating model for work, one where the workforce places skills rather than jobs at the centre. Organisations able to effectively map their skills, diagnosing any skills gaps and potential issues, will be much more prepared for the evolving business needs. But it takes a change in attitude for HR and the rest of the workforce to no longer see individuals as confined to job titles, but instead as owners of the set of skills that can be moulded to fit business requirements. To discuss what this might look like now and in the future, I have a fantastic panel of experts joining me. So first of all, a warm welcome to Jason Serrato, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Eightfold AI. With extensive experience in talent acquisition, Jason has worked on numerous HR transformation projects and was recognised as one of HR Tech's top 100 industry influencers. Next, we have Jo Regan-Iles, Chief People Officer at AT Management. Jo has over 20 years' experience leading global people teams through transformation and change programs and has held several board positions supporting business growth through acquisition. And last but not least, we have Donald Ross, Head of Talent Intelligence, Learning and Engagement at SAP SuccessFactors. Donald has held senior leadership positions across a number of training providers and has 25 years' experience in talent management and learning and development. So a warm welcome to our extremely experienced and knowledgeable panel. And now, hopefully, our viewers can see you all. To kick things off, I'd like to launch a poll for our live viewers to take part in. There'll be a few opportunities to log your thoughts throughout the debate today, and it's always really fab hearing from you, so please do log that. There's also a Q&A function to the right of your screens. If any of our guests are saying something you'd like to know more on, or you have a question for anyone, please pop it in there and we'll do the Q&A session at the end. So the first poll I'd like to ask our audience is, does your organisation have a good understanding of what skills it will need in the future? And there's just three options here: yes, a little, or no. And as the audience log their thoughts on that, let's go over to our panel for their first question. It's a big topic, so we'll try and get through as much as possible in the small amount of time that we have. So first things first, what is driving the shift from jobs to skills? And Jason, we'll start with you on that one.
It's a great question. I'm sure it'll spark a lot of conversation, so it's a great place to start. I think there's a couple things. Number one is we now have technology and the capability that gives us this deeper understanding of work and this deeper ability to process data in real time to be able to get at this more granular nature of the work information that we've been sitting on in HR. But at the same time, the nature of work is changing so fast that job descriptions have always been somewhat of a lagging item. And just the fast-paced nature of the way work is getting done, the nature in which jobs are actually being achieved and completed, the type of workers that are being used to achieve some of this work in organizations is all changing so fast and so rapidly that job descriptions aren't as reliable as they used to be. And, even hiring managers aren't necessarily the greatest expert to know what is needed to get the job done, because the way the manager did it is different from how maybe the worker's doing it today. So this greater understanding of the ability to process data in real time using things like skills information is giving us insight to the way the work is being done, which is maybe different than how it's portrayed in a job description or by a job title. I'd love to hear the other panelists' thoughts on this. It's just a little bit of the way of the world in which I see it.
Definitely. Jo, are you seeing this in your own organisation?
Yeah, I think, Jason, talked about some really key things there. And I think I do agree with what he's saying. And I think we talk about, don't we, a job description, we talk about someone joining an organization, and then we're talking about the job that we actually need somebody to do is often quite different to the job description. I think, I do see it in organizations I've worked in recently. And I also think one of the things that, any, HR lead needs to really look at is, what are the long and the short term, skills required in the business. And I think, having a system that can do that for us is amazing. And I'm sure we'll hear about that later. But I think it's very much an organization understanding how do they understand the skills that they've got in their vast organizations, because we have the traditional approaches to appraisals. But how does an organization actually find out what those skills are? I think that's an interesting one, Joe.
Definitely. Donald, you're nodding along there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. In fact, Deloitte, who are quite a big partner of SAP, did some analysis around that. Around about 63% of the things that are in people's job descriptions don't reflect the work that they do, which is quite quite high. So you've got to kind of find a better way of doing this. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is that talent acquisition is becoming pretty tough, especially in a highly skilled work arena. I mean, SAP, we've got about 107,000 employees. It's very, very competitive in terms of talent acquisition. So organizations really are looking to get a better understanding of the skills and other attributes. We can come on to that in a little bit, but the skills and other attributes, things like motivation, the motivation to use the skills that you've got. So these are becoming more and more pertinent so that they can maximize the return on the people that they have internally to get work done. So there's a lot to think about there. And I do completely agree with what's been said by Jason and Joe, that technology absolutely has a role to play there.
And Joe, just real quick, if I could jump in. In a former life, I was also an industry analyst. I did some work with Gartner for some time. And one of my favorite pieces of research that was done while I was there was over a 3-year period. They looked at all of the job postings posted by the Fortune 1000 companies, and they looked at them both in North America and in Europe. And when they analyzed all of these job postings for these Fortune 1000 companies, almost half of the total amount of job postings were trying to recruit for about the same 36 roles. So when Donald says how talent acquisition is so competitive and everyone's going after a similar set of skills, well, part of this is you have to understand what skills they are, but also potentially have to understand what other audiences you can consider to potentially do some of this work, because we're all going after the same people. So you have to expand the audience. But at the same time, that same piece of research looked at it over the 3-year period. The number of skills that were being added to job descriptions was increasing by 30% year over year, but a lot of the skills that were being added were skills that were going to be out of date in less than 2 to 3 years. So there's a lot of, just from a talent acquisition, from a talent management perspective, from an understanding, we live in very dynamic, changing times.
You mentioned some skills that might not be necessary in a few years. What kind of skills?
Well, I just think there's a lot of, especially now with generative AI, there's a ton of disruption for maybe it's not the skill going away, but how you apply the skill or the prevalence of the skill. One of the things that we use with our AI data is we look at emerging skills and declining skills, while at the same time looking at skill prevalence. And by being able to do some of that, you're able to see the changing nature of work. So it's some of the work isn't going away, but the skills you'll be using to do that work are definitely changing.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's go to our first poll and see what our audience have said. Okay, so does your organization have a good understanding what its skills need in the future? So we had 31%. Oh, sorry, a wasp just flew at me. 31% said yes. 60% said a little, and 10% said no. That's actually more positive than I thought it might be. I don't know how you feel about this, Donald. Is this what you would expect?
Yeah, so I spend my life speaking to customers on a journey, and I couldn't agree more. And the diversity of organizations and where they are on that journey. So this is actually more positive than I expected. I don't know whether we've got a lot of HR managers putting a positive spin on it, but when you get into the detail, around, do you have a really good understanding of the skill set that people have within the organization without getting on the phone and making some calls? It's quite interesting. So I actually think this is more positive than I actually expected. But you can clearly see here that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make that transformation. And the other thing that I see is that there's a lot of individuals out there in organizations that kind of look around and think everybody is further forward with this journey than they are. And the reality of it is that that's not the case. I mean, we have absolutely, and we do a lot of work at SAP with Eightfold as well. So, there are organizations right at that bleeding edge and using the technology to great effect. But the reality of it is that most people are in their infancy. That's what I certainly hear. Be interested to hear what Joe and Jason think, but that's what I'm hearing, especially here in Europe.
Joe, would you like to go first?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I think, I saw something on McKinsey earlier, and it was saying that, by 2030, they thought that, 40% would be new skills required in Europe. So I think it's timely, Donald, that you referenced that. But I think that, I think it's encouraging and positive that so many organizations are starting their journeys. And I think also it's really positive that people are, coming to things like this and really trying to understand how they can do this, because this is a really large thing for organizations to do. And I think to the points that Jason and Donald have made earlier, we're constantly going to be evaluating our skills as we move forward. So we can do a big piece of work for 2024, but then we need to do it again for 2025, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's really encouraging that people are, starting the journey, and also, sharing best practice with others and coming to events like this to actually learn about it. So I think it's really positive, Joe.
And Jason?
And I'll just say echo a couple of points. So one that Joe just made, part of the shift and part of the change is once you start down this journey, it becomes a dynamic, continuous process. Whereas, historically we've been used to cyclical and annual processes. This is something that becomes more continuous, in part because of the nature of the capability of the technology, but also just the dynamic change that we're going through. But also to echo a point that Donald just made, we are charting new ground here. Like, we are going into the future of work together. I've been spending a lot of time this year traveling around the world, actually going to a lot of executive roundtables with HR leaders coming together. And in part, the benefit of that is because we're all having this discussion at the same time, almost regardless of industry or geography, and we're all figuring out what the path forward is together. I think the other part about this is, once you start this journey and you have this interest to go down to this road to become more skills based or to incorporate more skills understanding, it proliferates all of your HR processes. So, we already mentioned it here. A lot of it starts in talent acquisition. But once you start in talent acquisition, it also feeds over into talent management, and it feeds over into performance, and it feeds over into rewards. So as you start to incorporate this understanding, it really feeds more into a total talent discussion and more of this kind of comprehensive HR strategy, which is a little different than how we may have worked in the past.
Definitely. It's not just a talent role, it's a HR role, it's a business responsibility to get right. Okay, let's move on to our next poll for our audience. Should jobs be defined by skills rather than titles? So I just wanted to get a temperature check on whether people agree with the way things are going or whether they have different opinions regarding that. And while our audience vote on that, let's do the next question for the panel. So it's been mentioned before, and obviously, if you've been to a HR conference recently, AI is everywhere. It's like AI bingo. So the obvious question to ask is, how is HR tech helping to identify and nurture new talent? And can we trust it to do the job accurately, or should there always be human intervention? Jason, we'll go to you, given your Eightfold.ai.
So I think there should always be human intervention. I think part of how our product is built is with the human in the loop concept. But I think it's much like, the result of digitalization and digital transformation, what occurred in the medical industry and what occurred in the manufacturing industry is now happening, in the HR talent and people function. So when I was a head of talent acquisition, I worked in a manufacturing environment. And at that time, there was a ton of discussion around the Internet of Things and how the Internet of Things would give us all of this data to be able to determine and understand the life cycle of what we were actually building and how long it took to build and how long it went into service and how to do preventative maintenance and what to do when it was ready to retire and go into depot. I think as we get that type of data, using that analogy of the Internet of Things for the life cycle of a product, we're now getting that type of data for the life cycle of talent. Right? How do you do preventative training? How do you prepare for the future? How do you adapt dynamically to what's happening in your industry and to your business? We now have this data set that we're getting from this capability that we're now able to apply in a faster way with a deeper understanding. But I just think, this is something where this skills approach is really shifting maybe the lens or the center of gravity for how we've done this and giving us a new way to solve some of these problems.
And Donald, sorry, what are your thoughts on that? How is HR tech helping identify and nurture talent?
Yeah, and I think that it's one of the inputs most definitely, and it can certainly help managers as another tool in the kit box. But I absolutely agree that there needs to be a degree of human intervention. I mean, one of the things that obviously is very prevalent, SAP are a European organization, so we've got very strong workers' councils with their own ideas around how things should work, and the ethical use of AI is based absolutely at the core of everything we do. And we've got an ethics council at the front end. So the approval of any AI that we use. And most organizations are actually the same. I was talking to a major manufacturer who had looked at a pile of different technologies and they were down to a final two, and they brought in the workers' council right at the end, who just were horrified and said, absolutely no way. Yeah. You're going to have to go back and completely rethink how you're going to use this stuff. So I do think we've got a little bit more complexity in terms of the use of AI and how it's interpreted by parts of these organizations, which is why I think the ethical approach to AI is critical. I do think that it can bring huge value. I mean, a good friend of mine, Tim Ringo, who wrote a book, Solving the Productivity Puzzle, has got an equation for workforce optimization, and it's right people, right skills, right place, right time, right motivation. And how do you do all that without some kind of systems in place, without adding a huge additional resources to your HR department? So I really do think that some of the technologies that we're using help, but it's not a solution to all goals. It doesn't solve world peace, unfortunately, but it is a really, really strong and powerful influencer and can aid in the decision making.
Definitely. And Joe, are you testing AI at the moment? Have you used it within your organization with regards to skills?
Yeah, so I think that, just to echo what the others have said, I think from a HR department, any department or part of an organization we work in these days, AI is there. From a HR point of view, I think if you also have the skills-based hiring, and if you also look at your internal employees, as it were, if you implement from a HR transformation, the technology and the constant evaluation of the skills, I think it will really help the retention of people and give people, new skills to do new things in their job. So I think that's really, really important. So, I think in anything we do, whether it be talent acquisition or HR, I'm always looking for technology to help us on our digital journey. To Jason's point, I do think we always need that human interaction. But I think sometimes from a HR strategy point of view, it's how an organization, shares the benefits with the employees about what they're trying to do, rather than not doing that and then perhaps having issues in Europe with works councils. So I do think it's how it's positioned, because I think technology, AI, systems, etc., from a HR point of view, it means that the work that the HR teams can do is more strategic, more business partner, and automation is in so many, walks of our life, really, isn't it?
Definitely. So it's about being open with those employees and telling them this is what's going on and this is why we're using this technology rather than doing it in secret or just behind the scenes. Yeah, that makes total sense. Okay, let's have a look at the answers to our second poll, which is kind of where this discussion started, I guess, is should jobs be defined by skills rather than titles? So we have 75% who said yes, they should, and 25% who said no, they shouldn't. Donald, where is the skepticism coming from with this?
Yeah, it's an interesting result, actually, and I think the organisations that we are speaking to, and I mentioned the Deloitte study earlier, that the job title and the job description doesn't match actually what we do. And SAP, like most organizations, hasn't got that perfectly right. I mean, there's a lot of things that are in my job description because it is the job description that don't relate to what I do on a day-to-day basis. So I think we do need to get better, absolutely, at that. But I think there is a tendency across some organizations that it's just easier if it's there's the job description, that's who I'm looking for. I want somebody that fits that box. I'm not really particularly interested in transferable skill sets. I just need to fill that post and I need to do it now. So I think there's a balance there, but it's interesting. I think if you'd asked that maybe even 3 years ago, you might got a different answer. So there is a shift, I think, into that skills-based organization. And I think the other thing is skills especially certain skills are really scarce, and the availability of these skills is really difficult, which is why we've got talent acquisition issues. I mean, there's more open jobs in the UK than we've got people to fill them, yet we've still got unemployment. So there's clearly an issue there. So I think there is a long way to go, but I think the technology and some of the things we're talking about today really helps to fill that. And I'm really excited for the future, and it's good to see that actually 75% people say yes. And we need to. The other thing I think we need to do is find ways of helping upskill, reskill, developing people, and getting the insights around that. And that helps with things like diversity and inclusion, internal mobility. Obviously, staff retention. Most of the organizations I speak to are not happy with their attrition rate. So there's a lot of things there that I think really understanding not just the hopes, desires, and aspirations of the organization, but the individual as well, and try to map that to a development path is really important.
Definitely. And Jason, do you think there's enough understanding or conversation around what skills-based transformation could mean for diversity and inclusion, internal mobility, as Donald mentioned?
I think people have to understand the data and the information they now have at their fingertips and what they can do with it, and you start to get a level deeper. You were asking around should jobs be defined by skills rather than titles. I think a lot of the challenge people are having is, are they mapping skills to jobs, or are they mapping skills to work and people? And which way do you go? And actually, I think you need both. I think you need both. Both inform the other. But from a diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a talent management and an employee experience perspective, what taking a skills-based approach allows you to do is get even a level deeper. So from a talent acquisition perspective, we've talked about job descriptions, and then we've talked about work and tasks. And if you break that down even further, you can actually get at the skills. From a talent management perspective, we've been talking about performance and promotions, and then we've been trying to get at internal mobility. And if you really get that down another level, you can start to look at proficiency. How can I develop it? Who has it? How can I move it around the organization? From a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, there's been a lot of discussion around, well, what are my job requirements, and are they actually the tried and true requirements someone needs to do the job? Or
Yeah.
have I been setting up unnecessary barriers for diversity, equity, and inclusion? So if you shift from job requirements to then skill requirements, then you can start to look at, well, what are the skills we're actually looking for? And are there a potential for skill adjacencies or the ability to learn a skill that also expand the audience for consideration and create more opportunity and more inclusion? And then a thing that I'm really passionate about is from an employee experience perspective, we've always been focused on sentiment, right? Employee engagement surveys and how are people feeling about work. Over the last few years with digital transformation, we've been focusing on their experience with work. What tools are they using? How are they able to get their job done? And I think when you start to look down at a skills level, you can start to look at, well, what is the meaning they're getting from work? Are they using all of their skills? Are their skills valued, recognized? Are they contributing to the best of their ability? So this gives you an added level of depth to start to approach these very specific HR areas.
Definitely. Thanks for that, Jason. Okay, time is tipping away to us, so I'm going to move on to the launch the last poll for our audience, and then the last question from me. Please do remember you can ask questions for our lovely panelists if you want to know about anything that they discussed or anything further on from the subject that we're talking about today. Okay, the last poll question that I'm going to ask the audience is around a skill that when I have these conversations, people mention time and time again, and I'm quite shocked that it's not come up today, and that is agility. One of the key skills for the future is going to be agile. So I wanted to know whether you would describe your organization as agile, and we'll kind of look at maybe why that is or isn't the case later on. Okay, the final question from me, and I think it makes sense to go to you, Joe, first for this as a practitioner. What are the steps for HR to switch to a skill-based strategy? And have you got any examples of where this might be working well? So if we have a HR practitioner watching this saying, I really want to do this, but I don't know how, what would you recommend?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, from a HR point of view, I think one of the things, I'd recommend as part of this transformation and what we need to do is, you need visibility by using technology of the skills across the organization. I think then you need a common approach for the organization for how you're actually going to do this. And I think, by building talent pools and looking at, retention, I think, if you do those things, and I think it can really, really help. What I'd also say as well on this is, I think, that we talk sometimes, and I've seen different things around, skills hubs that companies are setting up now to do this, as well as like internal assessment centres. So, if you have selection processes for, the reskilling of your employees and the redeployment of your employees, and you have transparency in learning journeys, I think some of those things then will really help move the culture and through the change program of what you're trying to do. Because the other thing I've seen as well, where it's worked well with hiring skills, is where, if you focus on 2 or 3 skills, what you also do with your internal teams is you also look at high potential. So you move away from sometimes a traditional approach to appraisals and all that type of thing, and you look more into a business wide. And again, I think that can really help with retention, but also I think with the poll of 75% of people saying, am I really bothered about the job title? I think we talked about agile. I think people these days and colleagues and employees do want to be agile, because working for a business, the business has to be agile. So I think our mindset is changing. And with that 75% poll, I do think that. So they were the steps that, I would take where I see it works well. And I also read quite often that some organizations these days, aren't necessarily looking for degrees all the time and things like that. And that's helping. So, I think there's lots of different things we can look at. And if you try the skills, transformation, I would constantly say, don't think it's going to be perfect to start with, but just try it, pilot it, and then review what's gone well.
Definitely. So maybe start small if it's completely new to your organisation.
Yeah.
Donald, so you're nodding away there. What do I have to say?
Yeah, there's a couple of really great things that we've baked into our solutions, but we're also using internally at SAP. I mean, so most organizations, I still think, sit in that hierarchy. But actually, when I look at the work that I do, most of it is in what we call at SAP dynamic teams. So we're constantly in an agile world, sitting in dynamic teams, whether it be a project or whether it be a fellowship, and that's really helping drive internal mobility at SAP. It's been one of the biggest transformations that I've seen in the organization. And one of the great things that we've released recently is some technology to support dynamic teams, because once you've got a really great understanding of the skills and other attributes, plus the motivation that people have to use these skills, you can start to use technology to get these people in the right place at the right time with the right motivation to get work done. And what Dynamic Teams is looking at is allowing project leaders or team leaders to basically set up these dynamic teams, break down the barriers of inclusion and diversity, and go out and find people that have the aspiration to use these skills or develop these skills within teams globally. And it's really been quite transformational. And the other advantage is that most organizations, or certainly a lot of organizations in our industry, have actually been doing that anyway. But what this does is it gives the hierarchical line manager visibility of what you're doing as well. And we use this concept of the of OKRs and where you are, but also the ability to use our talent marketplace, the SAP SuccessFactors Opportunity Marketplace, to find the people, which is, rather than you kind of doing what you generally do as a manager, you use your internal bias. Well, I know Donald can do this, or I know Jason can do that, or I know Joe can do that, so I'm going to choose them. Well, let's see who's out there that might have a real passion for this, and let's see what comes in. So, and it's really been a huge driver in terms of not only internal mobility, but obviously people retention as well. So some really great things happening in that area.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that, Donald. Okay, I'm going to quickly jump to our last poll where I asked about agile workplaces, and we've had quite a lot of response in the Q&A to this, which is good, and that's kind of why I asked for poll, because I know that people sometimes don't like the phrase agile. Okay, so we asked, would you describe your organization as agile? Just 18% said yes, 63% said a little, and 20% said no. Jason, how important is agility in an organization? It is a buzzword, it is overused. Is it because it's that important? And the second part of that question would be, it's kind of classed as a soft skill. Can we teach it?
So I think that's a very multi-phased question.
Sorry, I've just asked a lot of you there.
That's right. I think from where I sit, part of what I see is happening to HR is HR has historically been aligned with finance on an annual calendar, and you had annual merit cycles, and you had annual performance reviews, and you had all these things that were based on that type of a calendar. Through digital transformation, we've been aligning more towards digital methodologies and agile methodologies, which are sort of shorter cycle and project based, and you have more frequent performance reviews, and you have spot bonuses or all different types of things. So I think HR has been going agile for some time, but part of this is agile isn't just fast. Agile is the ability to change direction very quickly, right? And when you are looking at this from a skills-based perspective, you're kind of shifting the conversation. You know, Donald mentioned unemployment and the amount of people available to work. Historically, we've been talking about a supply and demand of people to jobs on this kind of one-to-one relationship. But if you look at dynamic teams and the nature in which work gets done, and you have an understanding of skills, you can start to have a supply and demand conversation around skills to work, right? Which is a many to much conversation. And when you understand your workforce and your needs at that level, it gives you the ability to shift and react and move much quicker, especially when the work we may need to be doing tomorrow isn't as readily evident, right? It's changing and it's increasingly mysterious. But if we know what talent we have in house and what they're able to do, we're able to pivot and steer and redirect and potentially reskill. And I think that's where this kind of desire or this need for agility is coming from.
Okay. And Joe, Jason's touching on a change in movement and organisations being able to adapt to that quickly. Is this something that HR has been traditionally quite good at? Are you seeing it get better at it?
Yeah, I definitely think that HR have got a much better at that. And I loved it when Jason said that HR has been joined at the hip, dare I say, by finance. Thank goodness those days are over for all the HR people on the call. Because, you know, you can't turn out come out of a lift and turn left and right without finance saying something. But I think that, you know, I think HR are getting a lot better. And I think HR are getting, you know, a lot more visibility in the boardrooms and things like that. So HR is seen as somebody, you know, the change agents are working with the business, commercial, etc. So absolutely, I think HR are getting much better at it. I think with the whole 63% on the poll, though, we've still got some work to do. You know, and I think the 20% of people that said their companies aren't agile, that's quite alarming as well, because they are people that may be thinking of leaving the organization. So it could be a retention thing. So I think sometimes when we think from a HR point of view with, you know, the questions we ask in employee surveys or Pulse, you know, do companies then really listen and try and change things based on feedback? So yeah, I think we're doing a lot better in HR, but as always, the world is changing, and you know, there's always room to do things slightly differently.
Definitely. And it's going to become even harder to keep up by the looks of things. Okay, we've had a flurry of questions come in, which is lovely. So I'm going to do a quick fire round of some questions before we wrap up. The first one, I think I'll go to Donald for. Interesting question. Are people reluctant to leave behind job titles because they offer some sense of security and belonging within a team, as well as clear path for progression?
Yeah, I think that could be the case. And I think that people always gravitate to what they know anyway. I mean, I'm married to a psychiatrist, so I kind of get a lot of this at home. So it's in it's their comfort zone. We didn't meet in therapy. I'm just putting that out there. But it's their comfort zone. And it's human nature to gravitate to what you know and you feel comfortable with. And stepping out of this, the cultural change needed to move to a skills-based organization shouldn't be underplayed. And yes, the technology can help support and drive you along that journey, help you build the road. But at the end of the day, it is quite a cultural change. I mean, even if I think about my own organization, it's been a major cultural change, especially amongst line managers, around the whole agility and dynamic teams and the use of gigs, the use of fellowships, the use of contingent workers to get things done when we need them. So it's a big change there. It's a big change. And of course, people get uncomfortable when there's change.
Absolutely. Jason, let's go to another question so we can get through as many as possible. It's more of a comment, but we'll turn it into questions. So someone says, I see at least two levels of skill. One is driven by the organizational values, for example, EDI, customer service. So that's one database. And then the other is driven by team, job, project needs. How can we marry these two to create a comprehensive skills analysis?
And I think that's exactly what some of the technologies in our space are trying to do. Is they're trying to get that more that more comprehensive talent and skills profile that starts to look at skills, that starts to look at traits, that also looks at required skills, but also looks at additional skills for what someone could potentially bring to the table, or things that aren't being tapped into yet. You know, people are more than their role and more than their job. And historically, a lot of our systems have been built to track only that portion of themselves. So now, you know, we're getting at a larger data set with a better understanding of the people on our team, to then better understand how they can be utilized in the sense of dynamic work and dynamic teams. Because it's not just the ability of someone to own and operate and deploy a skill. You also start to get at their motivation, their persona, their work style, all these things that make them more successful in specific scenarios. And our ability to understand this data and process it in real time and service some of these recommendations and insights is where I think the talent function is heading.
Definitely. And Donald agrees with that. Round of applause for Jason from Donald there.
Yeah, I just wish I'd got that question, actually, because
With the panel, Joe, I'll go to you for this one. Would you recommend getting a data professional to manage all of this people data, or should HR leaders be the data experts themselves?
I mean, my views when I've implemented data and technology into companies before is that, you do need, the data expert to assist the HR leader with implementing this, because, I think it's always better to get a data expert to come and help, even if it's on like a 6-month contract or something like that. When I've implemented something in the past, it's been really helpful having someone coming in and project managing it. So then from a HR leadership point of view, you can do what I said earlier, and that's around selling the benefits and make sure it's implementing and everyone buys into it and uses it. So my view would always be, as a HR leader, to bring in external support.
Okay. And Donald, I know some of your clients might be on similar journeys. Do you recommend them using data experts as well as the HR function themselves?
So what we've done is we've got a number of metrics out of the box. So we've got huge metrics packs that we use internally at SAP, but also our customers have the ability to get access to as well. And that really allows HR people to look at the interpretation of the data as opposed to grind the data. So it really depends on the customer and what they're trying to achieve. And I know that Eightfold have similar fantastic technologies as well, and we work hand in glove with them. So there's a lot out there that I think can take that pain away and allow HR to focus on interpretation of the data. But yeah, I'd love to hear what Jason has to say on that also, because it's a really important point.
And I think you mentioned grind the data, I think was the phrase you used, Donald. I think we're shifting from a function or a strategy of data management to one of data governance, right? And for some of the tools and some of the technologies we now have available to us, like SAP and Eightfold, you have to understand what the data is showing you and what it's surfacing, versus resisting the urge to try to map and tag and steer everything, because you're doing that from a framework that is historic versus one that is more forward looking. And when we work with a lot of our companies that are using this to great success, they openly admit that when they were using their former constructs and their historic frames of reference, they were being told a story that's very different than what the technology is telling them today. And it opens up their eyes to seeing their talent in new ways and having new strategies going forward. So you do kind of need two hands on the wheel, but you kind of want to follow the data instead of trying to control it, and then listen and learn to what it's telling you and kind of govern it versus try to grind it, to use Donald's words, or strictly manage it.
I've got one little last point on that, and this is what I'm seeing a lot, because obviously we're putting systems in that are not just HR or HXM or whatever. Is that organizations are looking at how do we use that great data insights around our people alongside manufacturing, operations, finance data. And that's where, if you bring it all together, because that's, if you look at the leaders of the organization, the chief executives, the CX, the board members, that's what they're looking for. Where does the people data in that mix? Do we have the right skills to be able to do that? Does that make economic sense? And that's, I think, some place that some of the big systems providers can really bring to the fore by bringing all that data together and giving insights to the board members of what it's showing them.
Okay, and we've got just a few minutes left. So Joe, just a few final thoughts with regards to where organizations can go on their skills journey, and any top tips that you've learned from transformation projects.
Yeah, so I think it's always quite, people are sometimes quite cautious about starting it because it's a big thing to do. It's a big change program, and I think sometimes there can be resistance within the organization. In an organization where you're very used to job titles, you're very used to job descriptions and working to your job description. So I think, from a change point of view, it's really working and thinking about, the more agile the organization, the future of work, thinking like that. And I think also, there's lots of technology out there that can help you implement these things. But I think also it's like, as I said earlier, just starting with a small project, even a you know, working with one team to see how that goes with the getting all the skills together and then redefining it and keep evaluating it. But, you know, I definitely think that there's a lot of help, there's a lot of support out there, but I do feel if people don't embrace it and move on with it, then companies are going to get left behind and will still be struggling with some of the talent that they're failing to be able to recruit. And I think also sometimes with organizations and talent teams, it's very easy to do what you always do. It's very easy to advertise jobs and say, oh, we need this person in finance, we need this person in marketing, rather than work with the organization to actually ask the question, what do you need now? What do you need for the future? And let's work on what those skills look like, rather than bring someone in from a competitor who may not have the skills for the future. So I think it's really about being strategic thinking.
Definitely a good call to action there, Jo. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. For more on this discussion, look out for our coverage of the HR Lunchtime Debate at hrmagazine.co.uk. Thank you to our partners, Eightfold and SAP SuccessFactors, to our fantastic panel, and to all of you asking questions and who tuned in today, answering polls. It's really interesting to see your insights as always. So see you next time. Thank you.